Imagine a world where a mysterious illness sweeps across the land, a terrifying shadow that touches nearly every family and every town. This was the reality in the middle of the 14th century, a catastrophe so immense it would be forever etched into the memory of humankind. We call it the Black Death. It wasn't just a disease, it was a devastating event that felt like the end of the world to the people living through it. In just a few short years, it would redraw the map of human society, leaving behind a world that was both scarred and transformed. The story of the Black Death is a chilling reminder of how fragile life can be, and how societies can be pushed to their absolute limits. This great pestilence began its terrifying march across the known world in the late 1340s. It was a silent, invisible enemy that traveled faster than any army. It didn't care if you were rich or poor, a king in his castle, or a farmer in his field. Once it arrived in a village or city, it spread with horrifying speed, leaving panic and sorrow in its wake. The sheer scale of the disaster was something no one had ever witnessed before. It was a historical turning point, a moment when the old world died and something new and uncertain was born from the ashes. Understanding this event is crucial to understanding the journey of modern civilization. So, what was this terrifying killer? The culprit behind the Black Death was a tiny, rod-shaped bacterium called Yersinia pestis. It is a microscopic organism, completely invisible to the naked eye, yet it possessed the power to bring entire civilizations to their knees. This bacterium is an incredibly efficient killer, and typically lives within fleas. These fleas, in turn, find their perfect home on the backs of rodents, especially the black rat. The rats were common everywhere in the medieval world, living in the thatched roofs of houses, in the storage rooms of shops, and most importantly, in the dark, cramped holds of merchant ships that crisscrossed the seas and oceans. The journey of the Black Death began long before it reached the shores of Europe. Most historians believe it originated somewhere on the vast steppes of Central Asia in the 1330s. From there, it began to travel, hitching a ride on the caravans that moved along the famous Silk Road. This ancient network of trade routes was the highway of the medieval world, connecting China to the Mediterranean. As merchants traded goods like spices, silk, and jewels, they unknowingly traded something far more deadly. The rats carrying the infected fleas snuck aboard the carts and ships, becoming tiny furry vessels for the plague, spreading it from one trading post to the next. In 1347, a fleet of Genoese trading ships pulled into the bustling port of Messina, in Sicily. And from this single point of entry, the plague would explode across the continent. The sheer number of people who perished during the Black Death is almost impossible to comprehend. It was a demographic catastrophe on a scale never seen before or since. Modern historians and demographers have pieced together a truly shocking picture. Between the years 1347 and 1351, the pandemic claimed somewhere between 75 and 200 million people: Europe, Asia, North Africa. This was a staggering loss, representing a significant portion of the entire human population at the time. The world was left emptier, quieter, and profoundly changed by the loss. In Europe alone, the death toll was catastrophic. It is estimated that the continent lost anywhere from 30% to 60% of its total population. Think about that for a moment. In some regions, 1 out of every 2 people died. Entire villages were wiped off the map, their homes left empty and their fields untended. Bustling cities saw their populations decimated in a matter of months. In places like Florence, Italy, the writer Boccaccio recorded that the city lost more than half of its residents. Chronicles from the Middle East describe similar scenes of devastation in Cairo, Damascus, Baghdad. In Cairo, which was one of the largest cities at the time, thousands were dying every single day. The combined death toll of both is estimated around 100 million people over many years. The Black Death may have killed up to twice that number in less than 5 years. For the individual who contracted the plague, the experience was swift, brutal, just terrifying. The most common form of the disease was the bubonic plague. After being bitten by an infected flea, a person would develop symptoms within just a few days. It would start with a high fever, chills, weakness, much like a really severe flu, but then came the telltale sign of the plague, the buboes. These were painfully swollen lymph nodes. Groin, armpits, neck, they could grow to the size of an egg or even an apple. These swellings would turn dark purple or black, which is probably how the Black Death got its name. Death often followed within a week. He wrote of how brother was forsaken by brother, nephew by uncle, sister by brother, and oftentimes husband by wife. Even more cruelly, fathers and mothers were found to abandon their own children, untended, unvisited to their fate. Fear of contagion was so powerful that it broke the most fundamental human bonds, leaving the sick to die alone. There were other, even more deadly forms of the plague. Septicemic plague occurred when the bacteria entered the bloodstream directly. This form was almost always fatal, often killing a person within a day, sometimes before any buboes could even form. The most feared of all was pneumonic plague, which infected the lungs. This version could be spread directly from person to person through coughing or even breathing, making it incredibly contagious. In the face of an enemy they could not see or understand, people reacted with a mixture of terror, confusion, desperation. With no knowledge of germ theory, their explanations for the plague were varied and often misguided. Many believed it was a punishment from God. This led to a surge in religious fervor. People flocked to churches, praying for mercy. Massive religious processions were held. Believers would march through the streets, praying, whipping themselves in a public display of penance. These groups, the flagellants, hoped self-punishment would appease God. Others looked for scapegoats and blamed minority groups. Jewish communities were falsely accused of poisoning wells. That accusation sparked waves of persecution and massacres. Popes even issued decrees saying Jews were not to blame. But fear and rage overpowered reason. Thousands were murdered, entire communities destroyed, yet not all responses were superstition. Some public health measures we use today began during the Black Death. Quarantine started in Ragusa, modern Dubrovnik, in 1377. Ships arriving had to wait on a nearby island for 30 days. Trentino. The wait later became 40 days. Quarantino. The origin of quarantine. Cities like Venice and Milan appointed health magistrates. They had the power to isolate the sick. They could shut down public gatherings, and they managed disposal of the dead. These were the first rudimentary public health systems. When the first and most devastating wave of the Black Death finally subsided around 1351, it left behind a world that was irrevocably altered. The most immediate and profound change was economic. With up to half the population gone, there was a severe labor shortage. Suddenly, the peasants and laborers who had survived found themselves in a position of unprecedented power. For centuries, the feudal system had tied peasants to the land, forcing them to work for a lord in exchange for protection. Now, with so few workers available, lords were forced to compete for their labor, offering higher wages, better conditions, even freedom. This newfound power for the common person spelled the beginning of the end for the old feudal order. Peasants were no longer tied to the manor of their birth. They could demand better pay for their work, and if a lord refused, they could simply leave and find another who would meet their price. This led to a gradual shift in wealth and a rising standard of living for the lower classes. It also sparked a series of peasant revolts across Europe in the late 14th century. The Black Death had, in effect, kick-started a social revolution. The cultural and intellectual landscape of Europe also underwent a significant transformation. The sheer scale of the death toll caused many to question the authority and effectiveness of the Church. This disillusionment contributed to a decline in the Church's absolute power, and helped pave the way for the religious reforms that would sweep across Europe in the centuries to come, including the Protestant Reformation. Furthermore, the plague had a curious effect on art and culture. A morbid fascination with death became a prominent theme, giving rise to the danse macabre or dance of death art style. Many historians argue that the social and intellectual upheaval caused by the plague was a crucial catalyst for the Renaissance, a period of extraordinary creativity and innovation that began in Italy shortly after. Looking back at the Black Death from our modern perspective on September 14, 2025, it is clear that this medieval catastrophe holds powerful lessons that still resonate today. The story of Yersinia Pestis is a stark reminder of the profound impact that infectious diseases can have on human societies. It demonstrates how interconnected our world is, and how quickly a pathogen can spread from a remote corner of the globe to become a worldwide crisis. The trade routes of the 14th century were traversed by caravans, sailing ships, but the principle is the same as our modern network of highways and international flights. The Black Death also teaches us about human behavior in the face of a pandemic. We see familiar patterns in the past: the spread of fear, misinformation, the tendency to blame others, the tension between public health measures and individual freedom. The long-term consequences of the plague underscore how major crises can act as powerful agents of change. Periods of great turmoil, while tragic, can break down old, rigid structures and create opportunities for new, more equitable systems to emerge. Reflecting on the Black Death encourages us to invest in science, public health, and global cooperation. It reminds us that while we cannot predict the future, we can learn from the past to build a more resilient and compassionate world, better prepared for the challenges that lie ahead.